we start CNS stimulants, and then, well, yeah, we'll probably do we'll begin CNS stimulants, but I'm not gonna, I probably won't be able to finish them for the exam, so I don't know if it'll be beyond. Does anyone have any questions up to this point? All good? Now, has anybody been like in the chat room that, like I said, that some students think this is online?
I don't think anyone thinks it's online. They're probably just not coming.
Yeah, because they had their other one, so they just decided to
Yeah.
take the
Yeah,
other.
I think
That's
so.
more likely than not. And then
So I gotta do something for you for comedy.
That's me. Midterm points.
Midterm points, or, I'll give you I'll have a secret question on the midterm that only you guys will know the answer to.
I like that.
All right. And, well, I might have said it, so if I said it, then they may know. And does anybody know who my favorite football team is? Originally from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh Steelers. Write it down, Pittsburgh Steelers. So I'm gonna have a question on the midterm. What is Dr. Shrip's favorite football team? You guys have the advantage of knowing, but if you tell them, then that defeats the purpose. It's just to get you the leg up on the curve. Farther to come. Okay. With that, I'm going to go through some of the important points with regards to ethanol, and then a brief lecture on benzos and barbs and GHB and things of that nature. And then we're going to call it a night. So it would be a relatively early night. You probably say, I wish I didn't stay home because I didn't really get much today. But you're getting reward. I think I owe you 3 points in the midterm for something else, don't I? What was that for you? I forgot. Well, we could just basically run a paper around it. Whoever's here gets 3 more points on the group.
Sounds good too.
All right, so last time we were talking about ethanol, and again, it falls into the classification of central nervous system depressants. So it decreases the likelihood of generating an action potential in neurons. And like we said last week, many of the CNS depressants have their action on GABA receptors or gamma-aminobutyric acid, which, as we said last time, is a chloride ion channel. And basically, when the chloride ion channel is open, chloride ion will enter into the cell. This is outside the cell, right? And at rest, we have this polarized state. So it's bringing its negative charge, so it's going to hyperpolarize it. So if we look at millivolts versus time, you have the resting membrane potential due to the differences in potassium and cellular concentrations across the membrane. And when chloride starts going in, it starts to make it more negative inside. So here's 0, and here's positive, here's negative. So, and threshold is here for an action potential, so you're moving away from that. So it's an inhibitory response. Right, so it starts to inhibit. So CNS depressants, there's classifications that are, we call sedatives, hypnotics, right? They cause sedation, and they cause hypersomnolence, sleepy, drowsy. But we'll talk about that in a few seconds. Alcohol is the most commonly encountered drug, right, in toxicology. And as I said last week, upwards of 10% of individuals in the United States consume alcohol to the point where there are either health consequences or certainly financial consequences, things of that nature. But for the most part, we're talking about things like alcoholism, car accident, traumatic injuries, alcohol poisoning, combination of alcohol with other drugs, right? One of the things with regards to CNS depressants is when you take two CNS depressants, right? It's like 1 + 1 = 5, right? So when we talk about benzodiazepines having a low margin of safety, or high margin of safety, I should say, but when you use benzodiazepines and drink alcohol at the same time, you can die. Now, some of the important things with regards to what we did last week, we said that, again, alcohol physiological effects are directly associated with the blood alcohol concentration. One of the things that's important to recognize when we're talking about BAC, we're referring to whole blood. All right? So whole blood is plasma plus plasma proteins, and then the cellular component. And alcohol is distributed to the total body water. Therefore, plasma, right? Plasma has a higher concentration by 10 to 20%. So if I have a 0.01% plasma concentration, right? The corresponding whole blood equivalent would be, somewhere between 10 and 20% lower. So if you use an average, you'd say you multiply by 0.85, right? 85. So instead of I don't want it to be 0.1, but let's say it's 0.1, right? Instead of being a 0.1, it would be a 0.085, right? That's the whole blood. And we also said that measuring blood alcohol concentration, I gave you a convenient, this is kind of an equation I've simplified for you, right? So if you look in the textbooks and stuff like that, the equation is going to look much more complex, but it's really quite simple, where blood alcohol is equal to the dose of alcohol in milliliters times 0.8 divided by the weight in kilograms times R. And this constant is dependent upon gender, right? As we said, females have higher lipid content, which means they have less water, which means that the alcohol is going to be distributed in a lower volume of water, so the BAC is going to be higher in a female than it will for a male with under the same dosage parameters. So 0.66 and 0.55, and again, if you look in textbooks and things like that, you may see some numbers that slightly vary from that. That doesn't impact the interpretation at all. Which one's the male, which one's the female? Remember, the female has a higher BAC. That means, which one is the female?
0.55.
Right, because if you think about it, anything basically that's in the bottom of the equation, right? If it increases, then it decreases BAC. So it's going to be, right? Because if you multiply, 70,000 grams, you do that to just get the units easy. It's easy to work with the units, right? 70,000 grams times 0.55 versus 70,000 grams times 0.66, right? 70,000 times 0.66 is going to make the BAC lower, and 70,000 times 0.55 is going to make the BAC higher. Simple, right? So if we do one, and we say we have, 1 ounce of whiskey, right? 80 proof. So the first thing we have to do is we have to convert that 1 ounce of whiskey to the dose in milliliters. So 1 ounce is equivalent to 30 milliliters, right? It's 80 proof, so it's 40% alcohol by volume. So we have 30 milliliters, right? 30 milliliters of whiskey, right, at 80 proof, so that means we have 12 ml of alcohol, right? So this number becomes 12. And then again, I'm making the assumption it's a 70 kilogram male, right? So we take 12, multiply it by 0.8, what do you get?
9.6?
Hmm?
9.6?
9.6, and if we multiply 70,000, which one's the female again?
0.55.
0.55, what do you get?
38,500.
38,500, and if you divide 0.96 times 38,600,
I thought this was a 7 kilogram male. You just put
Yeah.
in the female number for the R value.
oh, I'm sorry, did I say 0.5? Did I do it
You
back?
said 25.
Yeah.
All right, so assume it's a female.
Point 0.000249.
0.00025, right? And then we multiply that by 100, because we want to get it into grams per 100 ml, so it's a 0.025. Now do it for a male.
Point 0.000207.
0.00207, you multiply it by 100, and you get 0.02, right? For each one. So female's a little bit higher, same weight, same dose, right? Female's got a little bit higher blood alcohol concentration. Now what if they had 10 shots of whiskey? What would their VACs be?
Just be 10
How
times.
to do the whole equation? Do it in your
10
head.
times of it.
Huh?
Just 10 times of it?
Yeah, it's just 10 times, right? So basically, it's gonna be a 0.25 and a 0.2, right? But we're not accounting for time there. That's assuming that they did all their drinking in a short period of time. Now, let's say it's actually measured as 0.2 in a male, right? And that's collected at midnight, and the accident occurred at 8 p.m. Obviously, that's a pretty long lag between when they got the blood. It's a very rural area. It took a long time to get them to the hospital. And they actually reported it as 200 milligrams per deciliter, and that would be in plasma because it was done in a hospital. So they do it by an autoanalyzer, so they do an enzymatic reaction. Well, that's fine. And let me just also say, we know he stopped drinking. He was at a happy hour at a ski resort. He stopped drinking at 6:30. That's when they stopped serving. Happy hour's over. After ski. Drives out. It's an icy patch on the road. Skids, slides, hits a tree. Girlfriend's in the car. She's killed. So what are the important things we want to determine from that? Can you see that?
Yes. we wanna adjust the plasma value from the hospital, because it's gonna be
You
10%
want,
lower.
you want to basically adjust the plasma value to whole blood. So you either multiply it by 0.8 and 0.9, and you can say that's the range, or it's okay to go 0.85, because that's kind of the average. So 0.85, so 200 times 0.85 is what?
1/6.
Huh?
170.
170. So it's 170 milligrams per deciliter, would be the whole blood equivalent. And then if we wanted to convert that to grams per 100 milliliters, what would it be? 0.17%. That's his blood alcohol at midnight. We want to know what his blood alcohol was at 8 p.m. when he crashed the car. So, based upon all the information I've given you, are there any assumptions you can make? What's the first assumption that would be an important one when you're going to do some kind of extrapolation?
That he stopped drinking before he got into his car.
He stopped drinking about an hour and a half before he crashed, right? So it's pretty likely that when you look at the graphic end of blood alcohol concentration over time, right, that this is the peak, this is the ascending, and this is the descending, or this is the absorptive phase, and this is the elimination phase. So he's post-absorptive, right? So with an hour and a half, it's more likely he's on this side of the curve, right, than this one. It could take up to 2 hours, right, for alcohol to be completely absorbed if he had a heavy meal or something like that. But the average is usually between 30 and 60 minutes for alcohol to be, so we don't really know if he absorbed all the alcohol or not, but, you know, it's a pretty good assumption that he's likely on the downward side, right? Or maybe right at the peak. That's also possible. So based on that information, what is his BAC at the time that the accident occurs? Do you know how to do it? Yes, no, or maybe?
Isn't there like a rate of alcohol clearance?
Yes,
per hour?
there is a rate of elimination, clearance of alcohol from the blood. And the average for the entire population is 0.017% per hour. The range is 0.01% per hour to 0.03 or greater per hour for a very, very tolerant drinker. But the vast majority of individuals, 0.017% per hour. You could use 0.015 if you want to make the math easy, because there's no difference in the interpretation. But if you do 0.017, we have 4 hours that pass, right? 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 4 hours. 4 hours of metabolism. So you take 0.017, multiply it by 4, and what is that?
0.068. 0.068.
6.8, right? And then you add that to the 0.17, and what do you get?
0.23.
0.23. So is this person going to jail for vehicle homicide or not?
What state is it in?
Huh?
What state is it in?
All states are the same. 0.08%. He's 0.23. He's very much going to jail, right?
Yep.
Unless he cops some kind of plea. Now, would there be any scenario where he's under a .08? Can you find reasonable doubt there? What would be the factors that you look into as a toxicologist to determine what would the lowest level it could be? There are two things that jump out at you first. We know when he took his last drink, but we don't know if he had anything to eat. So what if he had one drink still unabsorbed in his GI tract? What would do to that 0.23? It
It
actually
could
would be
go
less,
down.
right? Because you'd have one drink that was unabsorbed that contributed to the BAC at midnight, but it wasn't absorbed at 8 p.m. So if you're gonna be really conservative, you back one drink out of that. And for 70 kilogram male, we've already calculated that for every drink he takes, it's about a 0.2. So 0.02. So we'll go from a 0.23 to a 0.21. So it's not gonna help. Now, we could also say, well, maybe he's a naive drinker, right? And he has a very slow clearance rate of 0.01% per hour. So that would be 0.04%, which you would subtract that from the 0.21, which would give you 0.17, right? That would be pretty much the lowest number you could get. There's no reasonable way in which you can say his blood alcohol level was below 0.08. So there's no reasonable doubt. This guy is clearly legally intoxicated. Everybody see how I did that? Now, if I futzed with the numbers, so they came out so that the lowest possible BAC is a 0.7 something, okay, it's 0.78, 0.79, right? 0.079. Would that be reasonable doubt? That he was, if there's a scenario where he's below a 0.08?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. There's a possibility he may get reckless driving or something like that, or, you know, negligent homicide or something like that. But it would be, there's a scenario where he's below an 08, right? So the charge would not be as severe as it would be if it was at or above an 08. Now, it may be, now again, the legal standard in the criminal case is within a reasonable, you know, degree of certainty, right? But a civil case, it's preponderance of the evidence. So not only is he going to be charged, he's also going to be sued, right? Likely. Does the preponderance of the evidence say that he's over a 0.08? Absolutely. Does the preponderance of the evidence suggest that he's likely visibly intoxicated when he left the bar at 8 p.m. or just before 8? What did I say was the blood alcohol concentration at which visible signs of intoxication begin?
0.15.
0.15. he's over a .2. So it's highly likely that he would have been showing visible signs of intoxication. In fact, when you read the police report, they're gonna say he was unsteady on his feet, he failed all the field sobriety tests, this is if he wasn't injured and taken right to the hospital. Bloodshot eyes, slurred speech, blah, 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 blah. Now that supports your opinion that he was visibly intoxicated. So now the ski resort is on the hook, the dram shop case. So that girl's family is going to come into a large sum of money. They lost their daughter, sister, whatever. And just kind of lastly, we could also use all of this to estimate how many drinks somebody had. So a lot of times, you know the blood alcohol concentration because it's measured, right? And forensic laboratories, police laboratories, medical examiner's offices, and so forth, they do whole blood headspace gas chromatography, right? So there's no conversion from plasma. That's why you gotta look on your exam. You gotta be careful about units and the matrix. Is the matrix whole blood? Is it plasma? Is it in milligrams per deciliter? Is it in grams per 100 milliliters? Or something else, right? Units in toxicology are very important. I always get the undergrads saying, well, if I'm off by a decimal point, do I still get, partial credit? I'm like, well, a decimal point's the difference between being alive and dead, right? So, a lot of times, we know the blood alcohol concentration, and as I was saying, it's done by Headspace GC. So for those of you that are tox people and you go on, you're gonna take the analytical tox, you'll do like Headspace blood alcohols. And the other way is by enzymatic, like hospitals do it in autoanalyzers. So they do an enzymatic reaction using ADH, right? Alcohol dehydrogenase, and they look for the appearance of the NADH, and it's not quite as accurate as the GC Headspace is, but it's very commonly employed. So you know the whole blood alcohol concentration. You know what the person weighs. You know whether they're male or female, so you can determine how much they had to drink. Because again, the most common answer is always, I had 2. Probably the next most common is I had 1. And the next most common would be like, I didn't drink at all, which is not usually, it's almost always 2. It's just very, very interesting, the psychology of that. Because they want to not appear that they're lying, the police officer. So they say that they did have 2 drinks at dinner. And a lot of times they'll say, I stopped drinking hours ago. And both of those are totally, it's totally not credible that this person only had 2 drinks, right? Because if his blood alcohol level is at 0.2 and he's 70 kilograms, then we know that he consumed 10 drinks, at least. Why do I say at least? It could be more. Why? And in what scenario would it be more? If he had drank over a long period of time, right? What if he started drinking at 3 p.m.? So 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 to 8, right? So he has all that time to account for elimination. So that 10 drinks could easily go up to 15. So usually, the way I would put it on a report would be based upon the blood alcohol of this magnitude, blood alcohol concentration of this magnitude, this individual consumed at least 10 standard alcoholic beverages to account for his BAC at the time of collection. That generally is a dagger because it kills the person's credibility because they said they had 2. But again, number of drinks doesn't really mean anything. It always has to be standardized. So, 12-ounce beer, right? 5% ABV, alcohol by volume, typical American beer, not like a craft beer that, is 10%. So it's 5% alcohol by volume. So if you do the same calculation, right, you've got 12 ounces, so you do 12 times 30 to get it into milliliters, and then multiply it by 0.05. What do you get? Do the calculation. So you got 12 ounces, 12 times 30 is 360 mLs, times 0.05,
18 milliliters of alcohol.
huh?
18 milliliters.
18 milliliters of alcohol. Now, if we change that 1 ounce to 1.5 ounces, right, how many milliliters of alcohol would that be? I used 1 ounce just to make the math easy. But what if we made it 1.5 ounces? It goes from,
27?
huh?
27?
No. It's 12 for 1, so it's 18 for 1.5. Oh, so what happened? Typical shot is 1.5 ounces. Typical 12-ounce American beer is 5% alcohol by volume. Both of them contain the same amount of alcohol. So a shot of Jack Daniels is the same as 1 Budweiser, which is the same as a 4.5 ounce glass of wine. Most wines fall between 12 and 14% by alcohol by volume. Right, so number of drinks doesn't mean anything. Like you see those jokey kind of wine glasses that look like they're wine glasses, but they're big enough to hold a whole bottle of wine. Right? Somebody could say I had 1 drink, but they drank 750 milliliters of wine. Right? So everything's got to be standardized to the amount of alcohol. So if somebody was drinking beer and their blood alcohol level came out to be 0.12, how many beers did they have? What's the minimum number of beers that they had? 70 kilogram male. You can solve for it, right? You can say, the BAC is 0.12 grams per 100 milliliters. The dose is X, right? And solve for the dose. I can do it in my head because I know that 1 standard alcoholic beverage raises a 70 kilogram male's blood alcohol by 0.02%. So how many beers is the minimum that he had? He's at 0.12. Mm-hmm. You don't have to do the calculation, do it in your head. Mm-hmm.
5 or 6.
6, right? If he's at 0.02 with 1, he had to have at least 6, right? Do 1.5 ounce shot for a female. So we take 18 milliliters of alcohol times 0.8 divided by 70,000 times 0.55. Let's be more, 70 kilograms is pretty heavy for a female. Let's say it's a 120 pound female, so how many kilograms is 120 pounds?
$54.
Huh?
54.
50?
4.
Let's call it 50 to make the math easy. 50 kilograms. So 50,000 grams times 0.55 divided into 18 times 0.8 times 100. And what do you get?
.052.
0.052. So how many shots would put this young lady over the limit?
At least two.
2, at least 2.
2 would put her at 0.1. Even less than 2. 2 and a little bit less. So if she had 2 shots, she's legally intoxicated. Doesn't take much, right? And again, 0.08 is the blood alcohol concentration at which all individuals are considered to be impaired to the point where they cannot perform divided attention tasks without serious risk of being involved in an accident. So that is the standard for operating a motor vehicle, 0.08%. 0.015 is the blood alcohol at which you start to see motor alteration, which would result in visual or overt signs of intoxication, things like slurred speech, staggered gait, behavioral changes, all of those. Get up between a 0.2 and a 0.3, you start to see overt signs of intoxication. They become clearly visibly intoxicated, and you start to see amnestic effects. All CNS depressants in high concentrations cause blackouts or amnesia, meaning that the person has difficulty forming short-term memory while they're under the influence of the drug. So not only are they vulnerable because they're intoxicated, they also have difficulty recalling the events as they occurred. So that becomes important in drug-assisted sexual assaults and determining whether somebody was in a state that they were capable of consciously consenting to having sex. Which brings us to some of the other other CNS depressants. I won't address that. I'll just say the next, probably most commonly encountered CNS depressants are benzodiazepines. And they get the name benzodiazepines because they do have a benzene ring. It's a structural thing. They're generally classified according to their onset of action, right? Fast acting, intermediate acting, long acting. There are many, many different benzodiazepines. You've probably heard of some of the more common ones like diazepam, which is Valium, alprazolam, which is Xanax, Ativan, which is lorazepam. Then you got Klonopin, which is clonazepam, midazolam, right? Is commonly used in surgery because it's a very, very fast onset of action, like seconds, right? If you ever had surgery and the anesthesiologist gives you the shot, putting you to sleep, you're out immediately, right? He says count backward from 100 and you don't remember hitting 99. Then, because it's very short, fast acting, you also have a very short half-life, so then they have to, once they put you to sleep, then they have to keep you asleep with an anesthetic, right? Some things about benzodiazepines that are important. They do have a fairly high margin of safety, meaning that if you take a lot of benzodiazepines, it's hard to become fatally overdose on a benzodiazepine. You have to take a lot of them. But again, there's that whole concept of 1 + 1 = 5. If you take a lot of benzodiazepines and you wash it down with some alcohol, you're dead, right? They are also addictive. They're highly addictive. So they have a high margin of safety, but they're very addictive. And they're addictive to also physically, they can cause physical dependence as well, which means that an individual that has been taking a benzodiazepine for a prolonged period of time, if they rapidly abstain from taking the drugs, they will suffer from withdrawal. Now, these are CNS depressants, so they do basically the same type of thing. They potentiate or mimic GABA, right? So they're increasing and opening chloride ion channels. That's why some of the clinical uses of benzodiazepines, the most common is as an anti-anxiety drug, right? They're used to treat anxiety. They're used, again, because of their hypnotic effects. So they may be used to help people go to sleep. They also, because of their ability to cause CNS depression, may be used like IV diazepam is used to stop somebody who's having seizures. Like status epilepticus, so the person's having seizure, they give them Valium to stop the firing of those neurons. And some of them are also in the category of drugs that are encountered in sexual assaults, like Rufalin, right? Everybody's seen the movie Hangover, right? Where they said they took Rufalin instead of ecstasy. Another class barbiturates, or barbiturates, if you're from the other side of the ocean. Barbiturates have been around for a long time. They've been largely replaced as sedative hypnotics by benzodiazepines because unlike benzodiazepines, they do not have a very high margin of safety. And it's much easier to die of a barbiturate overdose than it is in a benzo overdose. Now, margin of safety is a means of assessing how potent a drug is, right? And it's related back to the LD50 and the ED50, the lethal dose in 50% of mice, and the effective dose in 50% of mice. And again, the lower the lethal dose and the higher the effective dose, that's the interplay that comes into play. Or you can do a 99-1, right, which would be the most conservative. But again, they have a lower margin of safety. That's why benzos were developed in the first place, to come up with a drug that could be used as a sedative, not hypnotic, that was safer to use. But they're they're still very problematic because of the addictive potential and so forth. So some of the important barbiturates that you come across, like phenobarbital, secobarbital, amylbarbital, pentobarbital. And just like benzodiazepines, barbiturates are classified according to their onset of action: fast acting, intermediate acting, and slow acting, or long acting. Fatal overdoses with barbiturates were very common, several decades ago. There's been a lot of famous cases and famous people who died of barbiturate overdoses. What's probably the most famous one? Female. Early 60s.
Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe. It's alleged she committed suicide with barbiturates. Of course, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories that it wasn't suicide, it was murder. And why was that? You know the history of that whole story? You should read about it. It's really fascinating. as well as his brother Bud. And she was about to out them, tell, the public about the affair. And somebody, CIA, nobody knows to this day, nobody's gonna find out. Barbiturates, like I said, have largely been replaced by benzos, but they are used as anti-epileptic drugs in some cases. Phenobarbital was a commonly used drugs in individuals that had epilepsy to prevent seizures. Now, again, when you're on a central nervous system depressant and you become physically dependent on it, once you go into withdrawal, basically withdrawal is the opposite effects of what the drug does, right? So it causes very significant anxiety. It causes dysphoria. Dysphoria is the opposite of euphoria. And all of these drugs, basically, their effects are going to be similar to alcohol, right? So somebody who has taken a lot of benzodiazepines would almost appear drunk, right? So it's going to be increases in anxiety. You're going to get insomnia. The seizure threshold is going to be altered, right? So instead of, lowering the seizure threshold, people will have a greater risk of developing seizures while they're in withdrawal from a CNS depressant like a benzo or a bar. Another important one is GHB. GHB, gamma hydroxybutyrate, is structurally very similar to GABA. So it too is a central nervous system depressant. And we hear a lot about GHB with regards to sexual, drug-assisted sexual assaults, because it was one of the commonly used drugs for that purpose, where they would slip it into a female's drink, right? The combination of the alcohol and GHB would render her very, very intoxicated to the extent that they would likely be, blacking out, conscious, carried out of the bar, and have the amnestic effects of not remembering what happened. GHB first came on the scene early on because it was alleged that it increased growth hormone. And by increasing growth hormone, it became popular among bodybuilders to use GHB as part of their workouts. But it was soon discovered that GHB also got you impaired, right? Similar to an alcohol. And then it became recreationally used and recreationally abused. And because of its lack of color and pretty much lack of color and taste and so forth, wouldn't be as detectable in a person's drink. So very often it was used for that purpose. One of the things about GHB, which is kind of important to understand, is that when it's metabolized to components that are endogenous in the body. So, detecting the GHB is a little bit challenging, and you want to do it within a certain period of time. But again, that in and of itself is a challenge, because a lot of drug-assisted sexual assaults are not reported in a timely fashion. And very often, by the time they are reported, if they're reported at all, the drugs are not detectable any longer. You may be able to see something in a hair sample, because hair samples tend to retain the drugs for a much longer period of time. But a blood or a urine very often does not show that the person was drugged. Now, I think last week we talked about a case that I'm working on now, where we have video from a Marriott of the young lady being carried back to the room and then dragged into the room by her ankles as she was unconscious on the floor. Well, I just went through the deposition of the person who allegedly allegedly did the assault. And he said she ran giddily down the hall to the room, was very excited about the prospect of the two of them getting together, and she initiated everything when they got in the room. Well, lo and behold, when you look at the footage in the camera, it tells a quite different story. Right? She was unconscious. She was not giddily running down the hallway. In fact, when she was found later by people that worked in the Marriott, they put her into a wheelchair, and there's video of her just basically like, you know, her head bouncing back and forth, but she was like kind of like static. It was 12:30 a.m. when they brought her into the room, and he showed up sometime after 1, and we see him go into the room, and he stayed until 7 o'clock the next morning. So you don't know precisely when the encounter took place. We know it did. And she woke up at 8 o'clock, an hour after he left, naked on the bed and vomiting all over the place. Just vomiting. It wasn't until 2 p.m. that they got a blood sample from her for a BAC. And her BAC at 2 p.m. was 0.077. So if we want to go back to the time that she actually might have been assaulted, we could pick any time between, 1:30 and 6:30. But if you go back 12 hours, which would put it around 2 o'clock in the morning, you have 12 hours of metabolism. What was her BAC at the time she was in the room with this gentleman?
.28.
0.28, and possibly even higher than that. So that supports what you see on the video. He's clearly lying, right? So I gave the expert opinion with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that she was intoxicated to the extent that she was not capable of consciously consenting to any kind of sexual encounter. He's in trouble. And rightfully so. And he's the owner of the business. It was a business meeting, and he's the owner of the business. And he's married with children. And he was like, I didn't really want to do it, but she forced me. Very typical. Now, there are occasions, rare, but there are occasions where things do go the other way, where an individual is accused of sexual assault by a female, or sometimes males are accused of sexual assault by other males, whatever it might be. Rarely do you see a male being accused of sexual assault by a female. It has happened, but it's very rare. But I've had cases where women have made those accusations against, and two of them stand out in my head. One was, it was a case with the Army, and a bunch of people went out to a club. They were in the military, and this young lady was in the military, and her and this gentleman were dancing, and seemed to be very affectionate. They left, went back to the base, and she had very selective memory. She remembered going into the room, she remembered the whole thing happening, but she doesn't remember this, but she remembers that. And one of the things that she said she remembered was her husband was calling her a lot. That's a little bit of a red flag, right? If she was being attacked and her husband was calling her a lot, that doesn't kind of fit the scenario. Neither does the selective memory part. And it turns out that all that really happened is she got a little drunk, and she did something that she regretted. And to get out of the idea that she was cheating on her husband, because he was quite upset, she accused the other soldier of raping her. Now, I don't know. What do you think? That's a tough one. No evidence to support any drug involvement other than she was intoxicated. But we don't even know how intoxicated. Then there was another one where the male had a .4 blood alcohol level, and he allegedly sexually assaulted a female. And I said, I don't think so. .4 blood alcohol, he ain't getting it done. Not happening. Physically, unlikely, certainly enough reasonable doubt to opine that somebody that has a .4 blood alcohol is gonna be capable of assaulting anyone. Make sense? Lastly, another CNS suppressant that you may come across in nowadays toxicology is methylphenidate. Which is a metabolite of paracetamol, which is soma. Anyone know what soma is? Soma is a muscle relaxant, right? And paracetamol soma is metabolized to methylphenidate, which is a drug in and of itself that was commonly used as a sedative hypnotic, but it's a metabolite of soma. It is abused, right? And it is one of the drugs that you find in some of these cocktails that they talk about, right? Where they take soma together with oxycodone, together with a benzodiazepine in order to get, a better high, and they end up getting better dead. But again, the most important depressants are alcohol, benzos, to a lesser extent barbs, methylphenidate. GHB is obviously very important, although it's been scheduled now, so it's not quite the issue it was when it was, you could just make it in your garage. It wasn't illegal to have it. Anyone have any questions?
Could make
Huh?
GHB in your garage.
Wasn't hard. You can make methamphetamine in your garage, too. As we will see, all you need is cold medication, some other things. You have yourself methamphetamine. Well, you had to see, some of you had to see Breaking Bad, right? That show. Methamphetamine is the most commonly encountered illegally produced drug. Right? Any questions about anything we did today? Pretty good with the blood alcohol extrapolations and doing the calculations.